I'm talking to director Tim Disney, whose great new film is American Violet. Tim, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's an unusual film in that your previous film is a kind of a spiritual fantasy that's impossible to describe, but fascinating to see. And I was wondering for American Violet, first of all, it felt so much to me like Norma Rae in a lot of ways, and I was wondering if that was kind of a touch point for you guys, you and Brian, your screenwriter.
Absolutely. We came across the story on NPR, actually, about 6 years ago. My partner heard the story on NPR, called me up and said, "This is the most moving thing. What do you think?" And we started looking into it, and it took us several years, about 4 years, really, to assemble all the rights, to meet all the people, and to put it together as a script. And then, looking at that, the question for a director is always what's the most appropriate way to put this across cinematically, and it seemed to me that we had a responsibility to these real people, good and bad, to present them in a fair and straightforward way. So my goal as the filmmaker was to do it as unobtrusively as possible, and just to make the coverage simple, to never try to draw attention to the camera. There are a couple of flourishes here and there where it felt appropriate to do it, but for the most part it's a very straightforward film in response to the subject matter.
But I guess I found myself fascinated by the way that your lead, who I don't know, I've not seen her in a film before, and she's really a striking actress. But again, I just found, especially the way she was dealing with Tim Blake Nelson in the film, it was like watching Sally Field and Ron Liebman and Norma Rae.
Yeah, well, that's a flattering comparison. I mean, that was a wonderful movie where we have had a great tradition of these kinds of movies in our country, and we don't see so many of them anymore, except on TV. There's kind of a, there has been a criticism of this movie that it's a glorified TV movie. I hope that it's more than that, but I think there's a place for this. Silkwood is another example.
Sure.
One thing that I hope we did differently in this movie is that commonly stories like this are told from the point of view of the outsiders who come into the environment and set the yokels straight or save them from themselves. We tried to do the opposite. There are characters who come from the outside, the ACLU character Tim Blake Nelson, but it's told from the point of view of Dee Roberts, the woman who the events happen to, and then the woman who makes the choice to precipitate this chain of events.
Well, it's an interesting the way that the film is started. It's a very intimate, quiet home that we see, and even when one of the daughters drops a jar of peanut butter, Dee is very calm, and you can see that she knows how to run her household, and that really gives us some sense of what she's going to be like when she has to go up against real problems, but it sets a real contrast to what follows after that. And I was wondering how you guys came up with starting the film in that way.
Well, we're essentially, through the opening sequence, cross-cutting between Dee preparing for her day in the most quiet, intimate way with her children, and the police preparing for this raid. And obviously, these two worlds are going to collide, and we're hoping to raise the question in the viewer's mind, why? Why are we why would this happen? You know?
But it's every day for both of them, and it's fascinating too, seeing Calvin, played by Michael O'Keefe, just going about this as if he's done it a number of times, and he has.
Yes.
I mean, so this is
annually.
Yes.
In fact.
Yes, and that was to me, in watching the film, the real chilling thing is just sort of going back in my head to the way the film starts, and this is just what he does. And that was an interesting way to sort of do that too, to sort of show that these are the lines that your two opposing forces lead.
Mm-hmm. When Dee decides to fight back, it becomes personal. But prior to that, it's not personal. She's just another statistic in his ongoing operation. You know, he has no awareness of her as an individual. And that comes out later in the film, how she got onto the list in the first place.
That's what's striking to me too, that in the latter half of the 20th century, that evidence that's scurrilous can be used in the state of Texas as if it were real physical evidence.
Yes. That law has been changed, largely as a result of this case and some other cases. What happened in Tulia, which you might be familiar with as well, which got a lot of national attention as well, and many, many, many other cases. These are not isolated episodes. It doesn't only happen in Texas. It happens everywhere. The ACLU is very actively trying to deal with the misuse of confidential informants, who are also victims in all of this. And the gentleman portrayed in the film is really a tragic figure and a heroic figure in his way. I mean, he was dragged out of prison and threatened to do the stuff that he did, and he felt he had no choice, obviously. And then unceremoniously dumped back into prison at the end of all of this. There have been far more terrible cases. There was one in Florida where a woman was pressured into wearing a wire and was ultimately killed in the act of trying to acquire evidence for the police.
What's fascinating is to see this movie at a time when extraordinary rendition is used, and in effect, this is a rendition domestically used.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things that was so striking to me at the beginning was that the events took place simultaneous with the first election of George Bush. So we have the television clips of that happening in the background, and that obviously just sets the time. But it's more than that, because I mean it's obviously supremely ironic that while she's in jail being pressured to plead guilty to a crime she didn't commit, he's in the Supreme Court being given an election he didn't win. And at that time, as you recall, a lot of the editorial work about the election was how capitalism and democracy had evolved to this perfect pitch where we really were deciding on the color of Al Gore's suit. So it didn't really matter who we chose. And we find out it really matters who we choose, and that this stuff comes from the top down.
Not only that, but you can't watch that stuff and watching Al Gore basically concede the election and not remember the way the African American voters were disenfranchised,
yes,
and to sort of see these two parallels. And I don't know if this was mentioned before, but I thought it was a striking and very subtle thing to not beat people over the head with that, because you can't be a person of color and watch this film and not be reminded of what happened in Florida and how
yes,
blacks were basically pushed out of the system in the same way they're being abused in your film.
Well, I don't know the exact numbers, but the election turned on something like 400 votes in Florida, and I'm guessing that there are hundreds of thousands of African American voters in Florida who were ineligible to vote because of drug arrests.
Oh, yeah,
so there's a direct correlation.
That's why, I don't know if people mention that in reviews or they're writing about it now, but I couldn't help but think about how the film is a microcosm of the way African Americans have been marginalized by the judicial system, and how that connected to the vote or the way the decision was made in Florida, and that must have been a way that you guys, or key to the way you guys worked the film out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there were so many issues. But we were trying to make a compelling movie, so it was very difficult to try to get all of that, to epitomize all of that into movie form, and that was really the struggle with the script, was to try to balance all this stuff out in the form of a narrative that didn't feel like. I was reminded of the famous quote from Daryl Zanuck, who, and I think Moss Hart, the playwright, said, "Daryl, what kind of a message are you trying to send with this picture?" And they said, "If you want to send a message, call Western Union." And I love that quote, and it's a warning, that if you start thinking about what kind of a message you're trying to send, you may be forgetting that you're trying to tell a good story at the same time. So that was a real difficult balancing act for us to play throughout.
Did you find yourself arguing, on behalf of the fact that we have an audience to serve here, so we can't be too broad with this and too heavy, and we
yes,
make it specifically, because it's Dee's story, and we don't forget that. There are times it gets away from her a little bit, but it always comes back to her.
Yes, we constantly working on that, and then there's the issue of melodrama as well, that the events and the characters are so extreme in real life. That it was almost stranger than fiction.
Yeah. That must have been scary to you in terms of dramatizing this, bringing it up there, to not polarize it so much and try to make it feel realistic and not just like melodrama.
Yeah. And I think it's not an unfair criticism to say that the villain is a too easy villain. But as you say, the focus of the film was really Dee and her heroic choice to put herself and her family at risk to fight against this injustice. It was not about the mindset of the racist. That's a different movie. Sure. That's an interesting movie too, but that's not what this one was, and I didn't feel like we could accomplish both of those things in the same movie.
A fascinating postscript is that he's still in office.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's been reelected 2 or 3 times since these events, and he's run unopposed both times, every time.
And that's amazing to me, because you think about this, and movies generally like this try to find a case where at least the bad guy has been turned out of office. And in fact, that system is still in play in a lot of ways, obviously.
Well, there are some postscripts at the end of the movie that we had a lot of debate over. Because conventional wisdom is that you leave them feeling happy when they go out of the theater, and we do have that wonderful Nina Simone song that is actually ambiguous. The lyrics of it are ambiguous or ambivalent. I wish I knew what it was like to be free, is what she says. But it's upbeat, but it's an up-tempo. You know, it feels good, and they're in the church celebrating, and then those grim facts come on, and we took a long time to decide to do that, because are we undercutting this good thing that we've created throughout the movie, this message of hope? But I think it's important for people to know that change is incremental. You know, that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The fight goes on.
I guess I find myself thinking too is that still, because when I heard that song, she's still going back to being a welfare mother. I mean, it's not like her life is really, she's not been like taken out of that system at all. She's still living there in that area, and you just kind of think, wow, had she been turned out of the projects, then there was no social net to catch her if she'd actually gone along with the system.
No, had she taken the plea, it would have been very, very, very tough for her. And even if she had taken the plea, what happened is that the arrest was all expunged from her record. But for a long time, it took a long time for that to happen, so she still had the arrest on her record. And that was enough to prevent her from getting work, from getting a student loan. Have you ever been arrested for a felony? Not have you ever been convicted of a felony. That once you're done, especially if you come from her background. So, I mean, it's within the DA's power just to simply arrest you without any evidence whatsoever, and then drop the charges, but you have this arrest record.
Now, how did you find Nicole, the young woman who plays the lead?
She was discovered by our fabulous casting director, Susan Shopmaker, and we looked at, it's a sad truth that the list of young African-American leading ladies is fairly short, because not many roles are written, leading roles are written for young black women. It's the sad truth. And we considered all the usual candidates, and they are all fabulous actresses, and we could have made a really great movie with any one of them. In the end, we cast Nicole because she was the best person that we saw, and because she's young, you know, and it's a very important quality in that character, to be a child with children, you know, to be at the same time a mother to these 4 children and a daughter to her mother. And she's very reliant on her mother. She has very much a daughter relationship with her mother. And for someone in their early to mid-30s, that quality is muted. Not that it couldn't have been a successful movie, but it wouldn't have had that important thing.
Sure. Now, has Dee seen the film yet?
Yes.
And what did she say?
The movie premiered at Telluride Festival, and Dee saw it, Nicole saw it sitting next to Regina Kelly, the woman she plays, and they both watched it for the first time together. I sat behind them. I was so nervous. And I just watching them, they just gripped each other's hand throughout the entire thing. And it was really a moving experience, because Regina got up on the stage afterwards with her 4 children, and the audience was just moved to tears by that. I don't think Regina's children, who were very young when the events took place, really understood what it is she had gone through. They were too young to really understand what had happened, and now they're old enough to see it more objectively and really get an appreciation for what their mother did. It was really a privilege and an honor to be there for that, and to have had any part of that.
What was your first meeting with the real Dee, with Regina like?
I did not meet Regina personally until right before the filming, and I kept a little bit of distance on purpose because I didn't want to become too beholden to the real personalities. For the reasons we talked about before, that I thought it was my job to make a compelling movie.
Okay.
And I didn't want to get so close to them that I was afraid to change how we portrayed them, or to get confused about what was best for the movie and what was best for Regina. Since then, we've spent a fair amount of time together, and she's fabulous. She's fabulous.
Well, what is it that you were thinking you really wanted the film to do? I mean, because it works as a social document and as a piece of drama. What was key to you? I mean, did you really want to try to find a way to marry both these things, or what did you want?
Yes. I mean, in the great tradition of movies like Norma Ray, sure. You know, which is a moving film on every level, you know.
But there's also, I think, this is really an adult film too. I mean, in that all these kinds of compromise that we're talking about here, and I imagine that must have been something that attracted you as well, that there wasn't a clear-cut ending to all of this.
Yes, absolutely. It's a real-world result. You know, they didn't win the case in a dramatic courtroom scene; they settled the case. You know, which is the way things more often happen.
Yeah, and effective no kind of plea bargaining.
Yeah, and no one admitted guilt for doing anything, and you know, and there wasn't the big explosion. There was a big explosion that did happen in a deposition room, but there wasn't that gavel slamming down, judge slap down kind of moment that most courtroom dramas have. I mean, somebody said it's a courtroom drama without the courtroom. You know?
I've got to ask you this. I guess my last question. To get somebody like Michael O'Keefe to play this guy who is not the kind of fire-breathing racist we're used to seeing in movies, but somebody who's really comfortable with himself and doesn't have that moment of agonizing reappraisal where his life has changed. What was that conversation like in terms of casting him?
Not many people wanted to play the role, you know, because it's just so hideous, and people don't want to be the bad guy, that kind of bad guy. And Michael really seized onto it. We actually cast him fairly close to the deadline at the end, and he came in and he really surprised me. I mean, I'd seen him in many things, but I didn't know he had that in him. He was just chilling. It's a great movie. Tim, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure.